All right, so picking up Pirkei Avos Perek Gimel, chapter 3, and what we're calling Mishna 15, Tesvav. Sorry, no, we're calling it 16. And we actually, at the end of last week's class, started this Mishnah, which I was going to just do it quickly, but instead I'm going to give it proper attention, and we'll probably take up this entire class. And if not, then you'll just get out to recess early. Okay, so it's a very important Mishnah, famous and important. All Mishnayos are important, but this, I think, is particularly impactful in our outlook on life and on ourselves. And the Mishnah says, Hu haya omer. He used to say, the he being a continuation of previous Mishnah, which was Rabbi Akiva. So Rabbi Akiva, the great sage Rabbi Akiva, used to say, Chaviv Adam shenivra b'tzelem. Dear or beloved is man who is created b'tzelem, in the image, meaning in the image of God. And just to recap at the end of last class, when we went through this quickly, so we mentioned a few understandings of what it means to be created b'tzelem Elokim, in the image of God. The idea comes from Bereshis, from the book of Genesis, where it says a number of times that we're created in the image of God. But what exactly does that mean is not an easy question to answer, and there are many different explanations for what it could mean. Some understand it relates to the human intellect, that Hashem, God, granted us intellect in a similar way to him. Not that our intellect matches him, but it's in terms of maybe our creative abilities. We are in some way similar to God. It could be, according to some, it's in terms of our free will. Again, we are looking for things that are unique to humankind, as opposed to the animals, which are not b'tzelem Elokim. They are creatures. They have a nefesh. They have some kind of, they are living, but they're not b'tzelem Elokim. They're not in the image of God. So it could refer to our free will. It could also mean, on a deeper, more Kabbalistic level, that God hands us the keys to impact the world and creation in the way that he does. That God creates the world and continues to give it existence at all times, but God gives us the Torah and the mitzvos and the ability to affect the world that we live in on a spiritual level in a way that we don't see. Basically our acts have profound impact in ways that we don't necessarily see, but they affect everything, and they affect the highest realms of spirituality of creation. And in that way, we're b'tzelem Elokim. Tzelem coming from the word tzel, the shade, the shadow. We mentioned this idea last week, right? That we a shadow like mimics what the person does, or whatever its shadowing does. So God responds to what we do. So our act, God responds to the acts that we do. We can have with seemingly the most, the smallest things to the largest acts. It doesn't matter. Everything that we do has profound impact on the world on a spiritual level, which rebounds and has an effect on a physical level. That's a special power that's granted to us, being that we're b'tzelem Elokim, we're in the image of God. That's actually the approach of Nefesh HaChaim, Reb Chaim of Volozhin. Another approach on a more Kabbalistic level is that the human body actually represents the formation. The way that God created us is in the formation. Each part of our body represents different traits of God. So on a Kabbalistic level, we have different spheros, different traits with which God interacts with the world, and they are represented by different body parts. There's the right hand, there's the left hand. And so a human being is created to reflect all of those traits. And so in that way, it's almost literal. We're in the image of God. If we can give a physical manifestation to the traits with which God relates to the world, so it would look like us. So, and as the Tomer Devorah points out, therefore, if our physical being is a reflection of God, then we better make sure that our character is also a reflection of God, that we walk in the ways of God, that we're not a living contradiction, that we're not just physically in the image of God, but we're also in the way that we act in the image of God. So, and I'm sure there's many other, explanations, but there's a certain godliness to us, a similarity to God, which is a true calling, and for us to live up to. And that's the notion of being B'Tselem Elokim, of being in the image of God. And it's a great, it shows how beloved we are to God, that we are created in that fashion. So that's the first point of the Mishnah. And then the Mishnah adds, Chiba Yisera, but there's an even greater level of belovedness, of dearness, that's demonstrated because Nodas Lo Shenivra B'Tselem, because God has let us know that we're created in the image of God, and that is that He reveals to us in the Torah that we're created in the image of God. Shenemar, and it quotes a verse in Genesis chapter 9, in Parshas Noach, it says, B'Tselem Elokim asa es ha'adam, that God created man in the image of God. So He notified us, He let us know that we're created in the image of God, and therefore, and that's somehow a added level of dearness, of belovedness expressed by the fact that He let us know. And we'll discuss why that might be. But that's the second level of dearness, that He let us know that we're created in the image of God. Then we go on to the second part of the Mishnah. So in addition to that, so the Jewish people uniquely have a special dearness, that we are called children of God. Not only that, but Chiba Yisera, but it's an even higher level of dearness, that Nodas Lam Shnikru Banim Lamakom, that we are notified, we are told that we are the children of God. Shenemar, as the verse says, Banim Atem LaHashem Elokechem, it says that you are the children of God. So, so this is speaking specifically to Jewish people, and that is an added level of dearness to God, and it's an even greater level that God has notified us. Again, we'll have to see why that makes it greater. And then thirdly, the Mishnah says, the third section, Chavivin Yisrael shenitan lahem kli chemda. Again, something unique about the Jewish people is that we have been given what Mishnah refers to as a kli chemda. Kli is a vessel. Chemda is something that's very desired. So a vessel or an instrument, here we translate it to the Sefaria, desirable instrument. And what is that referring to? That's referring to the Torah. Why the Mishnah refers to the Torah that way, we'll have to try to explain. But that's what it's referring to. And Chiba Yisera, going an even higher level of dearness, Nodas Lam Shivan Lam Kli Chemda, Shebo Nivra Ha'olam. That we are notified that we are given this vessel through which the world was created. Shenemar, as the verse says, Ki lekach tov nasati lachem, I have given you a good taking. Torasi al ta'azovu, do not abandon my Torah. So God tells us that it's a lekach tov. It's interesting, the verse doesn't really show us that God created the world with it. So that's not what we're being notified of over here, at least. But we are being told that it is a lekach tov, that this is something very valuable. So God gives us the Torah. We know we got the Torah from Him. But additionally, God informs us that it is a lekach tov. It's a good acquisition. Yes, Robert.
I just noticed the translation you have translates chemda as precious one time and desirable another time, but it's the same word in the Hebrew.
Ah, okay.
So if
Good
people
point.
are just looking at the English, that could be misleading.
Right. Fair point. Thank you. Okay, so let's try to break down this Mishnah and find what the messages are that we can take from here. So we start with Chaviv Adam Shenivra B'Tzalem. Man is dear that he's created in the image of God. And then there's an even higher level of dearness that we have been notified that we are created in the image of God. Now, why is that so we were told? So why is that an expression of a higher level of dearness? Why does that make us seemingly more beloved? So the Rambam, Maimonides, who has a commentary on the Mishnah, the Midrash Shmuel quotes from it, and he explains, because in general, if somebody does something good for their friend and tells them about it, so they are demonstrating a special level of chiba, of dearness, more so than if they did it without telling them. Now, there are times where we don't want to embarrass someone, right? So we shouldn't tell them. There's a certain, added level of kindness when we do it without any expectation of reward. So sometimes it's appropriate, not to tell somebody. But if we're looking to enhance a relationship, so then you have to tell them that you gave it to them. If somebody sends secret gifts to his wife but never tells her that it's from him, then it's not really going to help his marriage. Actually, it's probably not recommended. If she thinks she has a secret admirer, that's probably not going to help things. So we had this question actually comes up in the context of Mishlach Shalach Manos on Purim. Question of what's the purpose, what's the goal of Mishlach Manos? So many understand that the goal is to enhance friendship. So the question becomes: are you allowed to give a Shalach Manos anonymously, or will you fulfill the mitzvah if you give it anonymously? And some say no, because the whole point is to enhance a friendship. And if it's anonymous, you're not going to enhance any relationships that way. You may enhance somebody's belly, but you won't enhance any relationships. So if God is specifically telling us, I created you in the image of God, I created you similar to me, and I want you to know about it. So first of all, the very idea that God wants us to know is God saying, I want you to feel close to me as a result. I want you to feel my love in creating and giving you this special gift. I think in particular, the fact that it's Tselem Elokim, that he's created us similar to him, is an even greater expression of love. God says, I created you similar to me, and I want you to know that, because I want you to know if I create you similar, obviously it's because I love you. And if I'm telling you that I love you, then that's obviously an expression of God's love. By allowing us to know that, by telling us about that, so it's clearly going to make us feel closer as a result, because we know that it's coming from him. So so that's how the Rambam explains what the Chiba Yisera. It's a greater demonstration of love, in that he tells us what he's giving us, because that says, I want you to know, because I want you to feel close to me as a result. The Leiv Avos, Midrash Shmuel quotes from the commentary, Leiv Avos, and he says that the reason why it's a Chiba Yisera, it's a greater expression of love, is because now that we know about it, so we can use it, right? If you give somebody a gift, but you never tell them that you gave it to them, and they don't know that they have it, so then it's not much of a gift. So it's not necessarily the case, because here it could be that this is something that we could use even if we don't know about it. Being B'Tselem Elokim is just a state of being, and it benefits us. Again, whatever understanding we take, but being created in this godly way, similar to God, and whatever approach we take of what it means, it benefits us. But if we know about it, it's even better. Because if we know about it, then we know that we have a calling to live up to. We have tools in our toolbox to use, and that changes the way that we live. So the Leiv Avos says if we understand, if we know that we're created in the image of God, so then will be driven to perfect ourselves, to improve ourselves. In that God created, God gave us this gift. It's a calling, really, to improve ourselves. So to perfect ourselves. So, in particular, like let's say we take the approach I mentioned from the Tomer Dvorah, that being in the image of God means that we physically, our physical makeup reflects God's traits. So that's a calling. That's a calling to live up to being created in a way that it physically represents God's the traits with which God relates to the world. So on its own, it's a great gift. It shows God loves us, that he creates us in his image, but even more so by telling us it, because now we can respond properly. We know about it, so we can try to live up to that calling, which is a gift. What was the question? How does God telling us that we are in his image if we know that he is beyond our understanding and ability to articulate? Okay, so the question is that if we know that we can't understand God and we can't describe him, so what does it mean, I guess, that we are in his image? So, right, so it would only, the answer would be that it's for something specific or some things specific. We have specific traits, or there's something about us that is similar to God. So that's, again, like we said, some say it's the free will. That makes us sit, we're in the image of God, meaning we're similar to God in a certain way, which makes us special and unique. It could be it's our free will. It could be it's our ability to impact all of the spiritual realms. So it's not going to be all encompassing. We're not saying that we are God, that we are, I mean, obviously, but we're not saying that we have all the traits of God. There's something, and this is Nefesh HaChaim goes, very specifically, that it means we're similar in a certain way. Yeah, Robert.
I don't want to just drive us off on a tangent, but I just want to note that it's not so simple. The question, does God have free will?
Okay. You're saying that that's the definition of, okay. I mean, yeah, I don't think we want to go there.
No.
Okay. Okay, one more understanding here. And this is what the Midrash Shmuel himself suggests. What is the chiba yaseir? What's the extra love in God notifying us that we're created in his image? So he actually first asks another question, which is that, as I mentioned when we read it, so it says there's a greater expression of God's love because he notified us. And what verse does it quote? It quotes a verse in Bereshis, Genesis chapter 9, that God created man in the image of God. This is not the first time that the Torah tells us that man is created in the image of God. This is actually after Noah comes out of the ark, and he's given certain laws. Included in them is shofech dam adam ba'adam damo yishafech, that if one spills the blood of another person, so their blood is spilled. The idea of capital punishment, and it says because man is created in the image of God. That's the verse that it chooses to quote. It does not quote from earlier in the actual creation. And the question is, why not? So probably the most simple answer would be because here God is actually talking to man, as opposed to earlier when God is creating man, he's not talking to man. But the Midrash Shmuel has a different suggestion. I'm sorry, I'm losing my voice here. Maybe I'll just pause for a moment. I'm just going to go get something to drink. Okay. So I think the simple answer would be that this is the first time that God is actually directly telling man that he's created in the image of God. But Midrash Shmuel has another approach, and he says that the Chiba Yisera, the idea that we're extra beloved in that created in the image of God, is expressed through this commandment, this idea that if a person kills someone, then they are to be killed. And the way he says it is, the verse actually tells us somebody who spills the blood of another person, their blood is spilled. Why? Because man is created in the image of God. And because perhaps otherwise one might have said, well, maybe we shouldn't have capital punishment. Maybe we should have monetary punishment or something else. But says that, but the verse tells us, no. It has to be capital punishment. You know why? Because because the life that you took was a life that had godliness to it, that was created in the image of God. So and that's why one receives the death penalty. So what that shows us, really the verse shows us, is how dear we are because we're created in the image of God. This brings out that it's no simple thing to be created in the image of God. It actually is so significant that it therefore carries the death penalty for somebody who takes another life. So the way the Midrash Shmuel reads it, actually, it's a little bit of different reading. I think the way I understand it is that the Mishnah tells you man is beloved for being created in the image of God. And we can see even more how beloved we are as a result of that from this verse. So the Mishnah says, man is beloved of being created in the image of God. And this verse shows us even just how beloved we are because of that, because of being created in the image of God. And that is expressed through this commandment, that this mitzvah, this rule, this law, that if a person kills somebody, they get killed because man is created in the image of God. That helps us appreciate just how significant and how dear we are to God as a result of that. Okay. Now, the Midrash Shmuel brings an important idea from the Abarbanel, Rabbi Yitzchak Abarbanel, and that is that the Abarbanel suggests that this Mishnah of Rabbi Akiva is actually coming as a response to an earlier Mishnah, which was the opening Mishnah of the chapter, the beginning of chapter 3, which was Akavya ben Mahalal Omer. Akavya ben Mahalal says, keep your focus on 3 things and you won't sin. Know where you came from, where you're going, and who you're going to stand before in judgment. You came from a tipa srucha, a putrid drop. You're going to the grave, to a place of worms and maggots, and you're ultimately going to stand in judgment before the King of Kings, the Holy One, blessed is He. That's the opening mission of the chapter. And the Abarbanel says that Rabbi Akiva is coming to teach the same lessons, but to tell us that you can also achieve the same goals by staying positive. It's interesting. Rabbi Akiva is kind of the eternal optimist. We see many stories in his life. He's always optimistic. He's always positive in general. And here he says, let's not think about the negative. Let's think about the positive, and that actually could be more beneficial. So each of these 3 clauses of the Mishnah are responding to the 3 things that Akavya ben Mahalal had said to keep in mind. So Akavya said that basically remember how lowly you are. Remember where you come from. If it's to avoid sin, to stay humble, remember that you come from a putrid drop, and that will keep you humble. So Rabbi Akiva says, don't focus on the physical, and and how it's true on a physical plane we come from something very such nothingness, but you should think about your soul, think about the perfection that's within each of us, that we're created b'tselem Elokim. We're in the image of God. There's something special about that. Again, it could mean that this idea that we have a soul, we have some godliness to us, and that way, if we focus on that, we'll stay on target. We'll stay on the path. We don't need to focus on that we come from nothingness. Focus on how great we are. We have this internal greatness. And this really cuts to the core of the study of Musar in general, right? So the study of Musar, there's famously, I think they say that this isn't Musar necessarily, but this is from Hasidic rabbis, but anybody could have said it, right? Like a person has to keep two papers in their pockets. One of them says that the world was created for me. One of them says I am dust and ashes, right? So two expressions. One is Avram says I am dust and ashes. The Mishna says in Sanhedrin that the person has to always say the world was created for me. These are two ideas that we always have to keep in mind. I'm nothing, I'm dust and ashes before God, but a person could become depressed if they just think about that. You also have to realize I'm great. The world was created for me. In other words, if God put me here, then He has great plans for me. He believes in me. I have a purpose. I have something I can contribute. And to go with Rabbi Akiva's approach, I have holiness within me. I'm created in the image of God. And so that's the balance, really, of learning Musar. Famously, the Slabodka approach of Musar is to also focus on Adlus Ha'adam, the greatness of man. We have to first realize what we can be before we can start improving. If a person says, I'm nothing and I can never become anything, then they'll never become anything. Person says, I'm humble before God, but I have great potential to become something great. So, and there's holiness in me, there's sanctity, the greatness of man. So that there's potential to become something. So these are the two things to balance. Rabbi Akiva is focusing on the holiness that's within each of us. Now, corresponding to what Akavya Ben Mahalel said, that a person should remember where they're going, that they're going to the grave, to a place of maggots and worms. So that might, cause somebody to give up and say, what's the point? Says Rabbi Akiva, it's better to focus on the opposite, which is that we are children of Hashem. Banim atem la'Hashem Elokeichem, we are children of Hashem. And what that means, the message behind that is that we have an eternal soul. And where do we see that? Actually, because that verse continues. It says, Banim atem la'Hashem Elokeichem, you are children of God. Lo siskodedu, do not cut yourself over the dead. And don't cut your hair in a certain way. Again, in mourning, there are certain practices of mourning that the Torah forbids us to do. And especially ones that involve painting ourselves or permanently damaging ourselves, mutilating ourselves. So that's forbidden by the Torah, even though in other cultures, maybe they practice such signs of mourning, but the Torah forbids us. Now, what's the connection between the beginning of that verse and the end? You are children of God, and don't mutilate yourself over the dead. Now, what's the connection? So many understand the connection is that when we say we're children of God, it means we have a soul that's eternal. And when a person dies, they've left this world, but they have an eternal soul. So yes, we mourn that we're going to miss them, and we have mourning practice. We have, Shiva and etc. But at the same time, we recognize that this isn't the end for them. You're children of Hashem. You're children of God. There's you have an eternal soul, and therefore we don't have such heavy expressions of mourning like they do in some other cultures. So Rabbi Akiva says that's what you have to do. Don't just focus on the grave that eventually we're going to become be buried with worms and maggots. That could make a person depressed. That could make a person give up. But rather focus on you are children of God and you have an eternal soul. And what we do, it has an eternal impact. And we can walk in the ways of our Father in heaven, and the actions and the choices that we make are going to be, we're going to carry those with us into the next world. And finally, Akavia's third thing to keep in mind was who you're going to stand before in judgment. So Rabbi Akiva says, okay, it's good to keep in mind who you're going to stand before in judgment, but first you have to know what you have to do in order to receive a good judgment when you stand before God in judgment. Don't just remember that you're going to stand before God in judgment, but remember that God is giving us a kli chemda, a desired vessel, a desired instrument, meaning the Torah. And first you have to know that God didn't give us the Torah in order to for us to struggle, and under its burden and its yoke, but rather God gave it to us, as the Mishna says, out of love for us. And it's an opportunity to draw near to God and to bring us merit for when we stand before God on that day of judgment. So don't just focus on the day of judgment, Rabbi Akiva says, but remember that God has gifted us a tremendous gift. Don't worry so much, I guess, about the day of judgment, right? Focus on that God is giving us the tools and giving us this tremendous gift for which that will help us when we get to that day of judgment. And by focusing on that, we'll be set for when we do eventually face that judgment. So three things, all in terms of remembering our purpose and remembering to stay focused on what's important, but all in a positive light. Remember that we're created in the image of God. We have holiness to us. Remember that we are children of God, meaning we have a soul, and our actions are eternal, and we carry with that, we carry with us to the next world that which we accomplish in this world. And finally, remember that we have the tools, we have the Torah for which to achieve that close connection with God in the next world. Okay, and so that's a general perspective on the Mishnah. And now let's just talk about the third clause in the Mishnah, which is this kli chemda, this desirous instrument that God has given us. So it's an interesting way to describe the Torah. Could have just said God is giving us the Torah. We're going to say it to call it a kli chemda, a desirous instrument. And it also says it's the one with which God created the world, which also seems to be sort of almost random in this Mishnah. So what's going on with all of that? So first of all, why is it called a kli chemda? Why is it called a desired or precious instrument? So first of all, it's something that we desire more and more. The Torah is a vessel which the more you have, the more you want. The further, I think it's actually in the Nefesh HaChaim. He gives a mashal, a parable, or really like a metaphor, analogy of somebody who is going into a treasure room, and he gets into the first room and he realizes, it's full of treasures, but he realizes there's another door at the end, and that door he opens up leads to another treasure room, and that room has another door, leads to another treasure room. Each time it gets, more rich and more rich. So he says that's the same thing with the Torah. We learn one thing, and we kind of open up our eyes to what the Torah has to offer, and the more that we get, then the more we realize that there is to be had. So it's a kli chemda, something that's desired. We're always desiring more. That's why it's called a desired instrument, because it's something that we always will desire more, and the more that we get of it, the more we realize that there's more to be had. And on a related note, kind of along the same lines, it's something that we can never have completely. We'll always desire it because we will never have all of it, and that's impossible for man to get to the end. The Torah being God's will manifest, an expression of God's knowledge and God's will never actually, and nobody will ever achieve the full understanding of all of Torah. There will always be more to learn, and so it's called desire instrument because we're always going to desire more. So those are two very similar ideas, but there's a subtle difference. One is it's expressing that the more we get of it, the more we desire, and one is just the idea that you can never have all of it. It's as wide as the sea, and it will always be that there's more to desire. Another suggestion, he says, why is it called the desire instrument? So he references the story that's mentioned in the Talmud in Shabbos, and that is that when Moshe went up to Sinai to get the Torah, and the way it says he went up to heaven, whatever that means. So it says that he heard the angels, and the angels were telling God, "Why are you giving the Torah to man? It should remain in heaven with us." So the angels desired the Torah. Now the Talmud there, the Gemara tells us that God told Moshe to respond, and Moshe responded that the Torah is meant for this world, at least the way that it's manifesting in this world is meant for this world, and therefore it shouldn't stay in heaven, it should come down to this world. But because it was something that the angels desired, so therefore it's called the desired vessel, the desired kli, and it's an expression of God's love for us that he gave it to us, and did not leave it up in heaven for the angels. And then the Mishnah adds, it's not just any vessel, it's the vessel through which the world was created. And this speaks to the idea that God looked into the Torah to create the world, and meaning that the Torah is again a manifestation of God's will, and it's what God wants for people in the world. And so the world is designed based on that. The world is designed to be able to be an arena where we can fulfill the Torah, where we can be tested, etc. But it's all based on what his will was, which is expressed by the Torah. So the God creates, as the sages say, he looked in the Torah and created the world. Alternatively, not that it may not necessarily refer to that the world was created with the Torah, although that's true too, but that the world was created for the Torah. So it says, Bereshis bara Elokim, the first verse in the Torah says, in the beginning God created, but the sages teach us, and Rashi quotes this, Bishvil Reshis, for Reshis God created the world. What is Reshis? Reshis means the first. So there's different firsts, but one of the firsts is the Torah. The Torah is referred to as Reshis Darko, I think it is. There's a verse that Rashi quotes there where the Torah is referred to as something called Reshis. That's the first something, and so the sages teach us that the world was created for the Torah, and again that's this idea. That's again the other side of this idea that the world was created to have a place where God's will could be fulfilled. It was created in order to have a place for the Torah to be observed, and God reveals this to us, and that's not only does He give us this great vessel, but He tells us about it as well. And it's called a vessel. It's called a kli. It's called a kli because, going back to the first idea, because it is that which God created the world with. It's the vessel. It's what God used, so to speak. It's a blueprint, but it's what God used to create the world. He looked in the Torah and created the world. So it's an instrument in that it's what God used in order to create the world. So that's the great gift of Torah, to be handed the keys through which God created the world. And it is, I think, actually ties back to the very first idea, that Tzelem Elokim, the image of God. As I mentioned earlier, the way that the Nefesh HaChaim explains the idea of being in the image of God is that we're similar to God in that our actions affect the spiritual realms. We create worlds, we destroy worlds with our actions, spiritual realms, and that is, how do we do that? Through the Torah, through its observance, through its lack of observance, through the Torah. And so the vessel that God uses to create the world is also the vessel that we use to create worlds and to destroy worlds, to have this tremendous spiritual impact that the Kabbalists speak about through our actions or lack of actions, etc. So very, very powerful Mishnah. The Mishnah expresses the greatness of mankind. It's a calling. We're in the image of God. That's a calling to us. It's also an inspiration. We realize when we recognize the greatness that's within us, we're reminded we are children of God. We have an eternal soul that's beyond this world, and we have the tools. We're given the Torah, the tool with which to bring that soul to its greatest level through the Torah, through the very tool with which God created the world. We are given that tool for ourselves to create worlds and to create really a world to come for our soul. And that's also in the Nefesh HaChaim. The Nefesh HaChaim points out that the famous Mishnah that actually relates to Pirkei Avos, because it's printing at the beginning of every chapter. It's a Mishnah, though, in Sanhedrin, that the Mishnah says every Jew has a portion in the world to come. The way it says it, though, is le'olam haba, to the world to come. It doesn't say in olam haba, in the world to come. Nefesh HaChaim says there isn't a place called the world to come. It's a place that we create for ourselves through our actions. Everybody creates their own world to come. There isn't this like palace waiting for us that you're just waiting for the code to get in. But it's a place that everybody creates their own spiritual world to come for themselves. So through Torah, it's the tool through which it's the kli chemda, this desire tool which God used to create the world. It's also the tool which we use to create our own world to come. Okay, we'll hold there. As I mentioned, I guess we'll stop.